Welcome back to episode 3 of Gameday Tarps podcast, Free Agency Part 2. We're going to start off today discussing the Ottawa Senators. We left off last time finishing at the New York Rangers. We went all the way from Anaheim to New York. So we're going to start off talking about the Ottawa Senators, who, lucky for us, have just finally made their big trade with DeBrincat, so I think we'll start there, even though we're mostly talking about free agency. But DeBrincat traded to Detroit for Kubalik, Sabrango, a conditional 2024 first, and a 2024 fourth-round pick. So what are your thoughts on this one?
Detroit added scoring, which I think they lack on that team. I think they need a little bit more scoring. I personally want to see Patrick Kane get signed to Detroit. I think that would be unreal with a line of him, Larkin, DeBrincat. I think Larkin feeding either one of those guys is you got a 50-50 chance of one of them putting it in the net.
Yeah, that would make them deadly. I think that this is a good move for him. Well, he's a hometown kid, signed for his hometown team, so I know that was a big motivator. It seems like he took a bit of a discounted deal at 4 years by $7.875 million, because reports were he was asking close to 9 or more than 9 when he came to Ottawa and some other teams. So I think he took a bit of a hometown deal according to those reports. But I mean, finally, we talked about it in the first episode. Yzerman is saying it's time to go. It's time to, bail on the rebuild, time to make the playoffs, time to be a good team. And I think now is the year for that. I think they finally get a guy who has scored 80 points. They have Larkin, they have Raymond. Like you said, maybe Patrick Kane wants to go there. He's waiting until I know the season kind of begins and how teams do. But I see that being a team he wants to potentially go to.
Well, that, and he's also nursing a hip injury, which is why he wants to sit out a little bit too. Maybe feel 100% before he steps back onto ice, right?
Yeah, and I think that, this team has so much potential to shock the world and really make it over maybe a team like Boston or a team like Florida, or maybe Tampa or Toronto have a down year. Who knows how things could work out, and the playoff picture in the Atlantic Division could look completely different. But I think that was a good deal in terms of Detroit. They got an absolute stud to help bypass the rebuild. And then when you look at now Ottawa's perspective, they get Kubalik, who's probably a solid 20 goal scorer every year in the league. He's not going to be much more than that, but you get good value. You get a good prospect in Donovan Sabrango, and then you do get the first. And I think the fourth round pick's maybe a little low. When you had so little teams to pick from because of his no trade and who he said he was willing to go to, you just had to live with kind of what you got at the end, and I think they did pretty good for themselves.
I mean, me personally, I don't see Detroit being not quite a playoff team yet. That's just my opinion. I know you were saying, you think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they're going to be exciting to watch, but I don't think they're going to be playoff caliber yet. I maybe give Yzerman 1 or 2 more years before that plan comes to unfold.
Yeah, a lot would have to go right for them to make the playoffs. I think the only one that really makes sense is that one of them, Ottawa or Buffalo, are going to take maybe Boston, or if Florida falls, Florida spots. I think that the other two are probably locked, but I think that's the only way they make it in, is if there's a major shift in that side of the division. But back to Ottawa, they also get Eunice Korpisalo, they get Hamonic back, and other than that, they weren't really too busy. I don't know, Korpisalo, to me, for a guy who's unfortunately had a lot of injuries, he played really well at the end of last year, but can you base 6 months of good hockey into a 5-year contract? I think that's a bit excessive, in my opinion.
Seems like, I don't know, with recent years, we've seen goalies sign big contracts and not live up to the hype, right? Jack Campbell, another huge guy that was big in Toronto, had a good year in Toronto, and then sent to, where'd he go? Yeah, Edmonton, right? And he got his spot taken from Stuart Skinner.
Yeah, almost, unfortunately, pretty much immediately, too. It wasn't like, it gradually happened. It was like, no, this kid is definitely better than who we have in net right now.
I mean, not that that's a bad thing. You definitely want to see your younger guys come in and potentially take those guys' spots, but you also put a lot of money into that guy to be your number one.
Mm-hmm.
To have it taken like that kind of sucks with the money you're forking out for him.
Yeah, obviously we're no general manager, but I would have a hard time looking my owner in the eye when I have a $5 million bench statue.
Yeah,
like, just sitting there most nights, raking in the dough and playing like 30 games. Like, I don't know what that is, $5 million per, if you break that down to 30 games.
By a goalie that was still on his rookie contract.
Yeah,
and exactly. I mean, good for him. He just got a pay increase this year, but
I couldn't look the owner in the eye with that being on my bench with $5 million sitting there, like, sorry for your pockets, man.
Yeah.
My bad. But yeah, Korpisalo, I don't like the years. I don't mind the $4 million. Apparently, the bidding war for Korpisalo was quite large, so they had to win it. I did hear one thing, or read one thing, that, all of us saying, we don't like the term for the dollar, but it does make sense that for them to get them at that dollar, sometimes they have to sacrifice the term as the team. Like, maybe they didn't want him for 5 years, maybe they want him for 3, but to get him to agree to get $4 million, he wanted 5 years to get 20 total, so that he could get paid. No matter who he was playing for, he was going to get paid $20 million or bought out or whatever. He was going to get his money. So I think that was part of this year, with the cap being so stagnant, teams were forced to be like, okay, we'll either take you on a 1 year or we'll take you for longer at a shorter term just to make sure you get the money you think you're worth. They were kind of pinned in between those scenarios based on the cap. And then they just have Hamonik, who they brought back. Apparently, big locker room guy, even though I don't know if you saw that video where he absolutely slashes Shabbat in the face on the bench.
I did see that.
Huge locker room favorite, is what I'm hearing, but he absolutely dummied Shabbat in the face with the stick on that one.
And I mean, 2 years, $1.1 million. You can't go wrong with that for a guy that back in his Islanders days considered a big piece on the defensive side, I guess, and then a little bit of a decrease when he went over to Calgary.
Vancouver.
Yeah, I mean, probably just the change in league, right? Maybe you see the decline there. He's so used to playing on the eastern side and coming over to the west. I mean, I guess he's back on the eastern now, right? But yeah, I mean, good for him. It's cool to see him sticking around somewhere.
And then I guess the last thing that's really floating around about Ottawa is just now that they have this cap, Tarasenko can't seem to find anyone to pay him what he wants. And apparently Ottawa's willing to. Now that they have the cap, I think they're just negotiating, as far as I've heard. So hopefully Tarasenko does end up in Ottawa, but I would assume a 1 year. He's not willing to stay there for cheap. He's just willing to
If you're going to fork over big dollars for the guy, 1 year is probably best case scenario. I mean, he's an older guy. His point totals are probably going to decrease hugely. I don't think he'd be cool in Ottawa for sure, but I don't think he's worth a long-term contract.
And I don't think he'd take one, because I think he wants to go try and score 30 goals again and then hopefully end up making more money when the cap goes up next year. I think that would be his goal. Now, I don't know. All I keep hearing is everyone's waiting for next year. Well, if everyone waits for next year, that was this year. Now all of a sudden you have this year's entire free agent class and next year's entire free agent class in the same year, all fighting for, I think it's $4 million the cap's going up. So you have double the players fighting for $4 million. Everyone's basically now going to have to take another pay cut because there's too many guys in the pot for the money that's available. I just think it's kind of a weird strategy for everyone. I'll just wait for next year. Well, even though he probably won't go anywhere next year, Steven Stamkos is available. What could he potentially pull from a team? There's lots of guys available who are going to be commanding big money if they hit the open market. We can jump on now to Philadelphia, who I think they had some pretty good players. They get Garnet Hathaway.
Big body. Guy that loves to hit.
Broadway bully style.
That's perfect for Philly. I love it.
Paling, Mark Stahl, good veteran presence. Victor Mete. They're now, just as of today, they have placed Tony DeAngelo on waivers for the purpose of a buyout, and I think that's because they couldn't find any way to trade him to Carolina, so they're basically just gifting him to Carolina.
And fun fact for anyone that doesn't know this, but DeAngelo, first player in NHL history to be bought out by 2 separate teams.
That's awesome. And I mean, the list that comes along with this guy, he's going to be the most storied player in history, with weird suspensions of racism and just everything from his junior days to the end of his career, because he'll probably at age 34 or 35 be bought out a third time.
100%.
Probably somewhere in that range. Someone will overpay him when he's 31, and then he'll end up getting a contract that's going to be till 36 years old, and he's going to drop off at 34, and then he's going to be bought out for a third time, and then maybe even a fourth time if someone says him stupid again at the end of that.
Well, with all the things you hear about this guy in locker rooms and how toxic he can be, you could definitely see this guy. I mean, if he's getting bought out 3 or 4 times, I mean, is it really even worth it having this guy in the league? I think if you've been bought out 3 or 4 times, teams should just be all right, this guy's done.
Yeah, he has value, but he's just got this attitude problem. No, I don't know. There's always been guys who have attitude problems that are known, but no one does it as publicly as he does. No one is causing the ruckus that he does in the media that drags in the attention. You hear stories NHL guys are telling about fights at practice and this and that. But like he does stuff in front of the media, like yelling at Shesterkin in the hallway and stuff. Like he's just doing dumb stuff at dumb times that are available to be seen by the public eye. Whereas most of the times they can shelter these problems and figure them out. He's just always doing the worst possible thing at the worst possible time, and it's honestly comical now at this point because he's just, he started off drafted by Tampa and basically demanding his way out of there after 1 year in the minors. He thought that he was good enough to be an NHL regular. Then they shipped him to Arizona where he struggled. Then he demanded his way home to New York where the whole Shesterkin thing happened, and then he's just been everywhere. Now he's, bought out of Philly, which is also technically his home area. Philly, New York, kind of like his home region. So like he's been kicked out of his home teams twice and he goes south every time.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of this guy. Apparently Carolina likes him because they want to bring him back by the sounds of it. So maybe that's his home in Carolina.
I mean, if he suits it and it works well there, then hopefully he can have a good career in Carolina. Maybe, who knows? Maybe Brent Burns can smarten this kid up.
Yeah, hopefully. And if they get Erik Karlsson, what a story that would be.
Oh, yeah. We can get on to that,
Might
too.
Might as well jump on it. Carolina.
Failed trade with Pittsburgh and them. I think it was Ty Smith, Sam Poulin. I think there was a 2024 first round, and I'm not sure what the other pick was, but I do know that there was a condition on that pick where if Karlsson played an X amount of games, then that pick turned into a first rounder. And I didn't read into it that much, but I personally think Pittsburgh dodged a bullet. They don't need him. At that point, I think Dubas would just be making moves just to make moves. I mean, it'd be a big name move, don't get me wrong. Karlsson would look sick in Pittsburgh, but does Pittsburgh need him?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Letang is very similar. He's not the Norris caliber point producer that Karlsson was this year, but Letang is their first line power play guy. He makes defensive mistakes sometimes, right? Like basically, you're just a little bit older Erik Karlsson. Like that's really all you're talking about when you're talking about Letang.
Mm-hmm.
And also lots of money tied up in him, lots of money tied up in Malkin, and lots of money tied up in Crosby. And all of a sudden you add Karlsson. And now Dubas did do an interview where there was a third team involved because he did an interview and he said out of people's feelings he wasn't going to discuss the other team and who they were moving, but someone was coming in to take some cap, but they just physically could not make the cap situation happen. Now it could happen. I think if they can move enough pieces around and get enough help from another team, I think that they'll get it done. But right now it does sound like Carolina has more cap space and more availability, but it doesn't sound like Carolina likes their package as much. Like maybe Pittsburgh's offering a better package because of the 3-team deal, but Carolina has the cap. So that's where it matters the most, is like who can actually take on this deal. Because Mike Greer said they refuse to take on 50%, and they don't really want to take on 40%. They more want to take on like 15 to 20% of Karlsson's contract. So Pittsburgh can't make that work in any mathematical way, but
I think with
Carolina
the Pittsburgh thing, I think I read that San Jose would retain $4.5 million of the contract in that turn down deal. I do think a reunion between Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson would be awesome. But yeah, back to the Pittsburgh thing. I mean, when does Pittsburgh take into consideration that you're getting old? It's time to start bringing in some younger guys that the older guys can start helping out. I mean, it'd be cool to see them make it to do another cup run, just in spite of Crosby and Malkin, but I don't think that team needs to be getting any older.
I do think, unfortunately, though, in terms of like Kyle Dubas, I think that he came in when he was hired and they said to him, we're in win now, make it happen. Like for the money they gave him and the contract they gave him and the freedom they gave him, like the president of hockey operations, not just a general manager. Like I'm pretty sure he's the youngest president of hockey operations in the whole league. So he still has to hire a general manager, but they've told him, I'm pretty sure, like go for it with Crosby, Malkin, and Letang at all costs. Like that's your job. Now for the next 2-3 years that they're playing, you have to go for it. Then we can reevaluate, but you got to go for it because we've committed to these guys and we're going to go for it.
Well, and then smart move too with re-signing Jari, right? I mean, I think that was another name in goalies in terms of could be potentially seeing a new team this year. Mm-hmm. He was in the mix of Thatcher Demko, John Gibson, Carter Hart. He was Hellebuck, yeah. He was in those conversations, so it's cool to see him re-sign in Pittsburgh. He's a proven goalie there, right? It's not like he's had too many bad days in his career, but
it's just injuries, really. That's the only thing that they're worried about is can he stay healthy. Then,
Well,
he's definitely earned his starting role. He just needs to stay healthy.
And then adding Nedeljkovic, right? I think they
Yes,
signed.
Nedeljkovic,
So,
yeah.
I mean, a guy that used to have a lot of hype around him, I think is a good backup. Not quite starting caliber goalie, as much had hoped probably back in his Detroit days anyways. But definitely, I think, a good tandem for sure, those two.
Well, if you look at Nedeljkovic, too, when you think about it, you have a guy who played well in Carolina under a very defensive team.
Yeah.
And now Pittsburgh's not very defensive, but they have better defensive players than Detroit did. He went to Detroit for the payday that he earned in Carolina, and I mean, right at the bottom of the rebuild, any goalie's going to look bad in that situation. And yes, his underlying statistics were terrible, but it was going to happen to whoever they picked up. They were going to have a bad year, and it just happened to be him. So maybe, because Jari, he goes down, and then you have Nedeljkovic, maybe he can find himself again if Jari gets injured. You never know.
Yeah, I definitely think that team as a whole would help his confidence for sure. I mean, you got one of the best Canadian-born players on the team. I'm sure even if Nedeljkovic had a bad day, off day, whatever, I mean, that locker room's going to definitely calm you down and probably try to bring your hopes back up for sure, I think.
Since we're already on the topic of Pittsburgh, we might as well talk about their signings as well, because they're next after Philly. We got Ryan Graves, 6 years, $4.5 million. Noel Chari, 3 years by $2 million. Lars Eller, 2 years by basically $2.5 million. Matt Nieto, 2 years, $900K. Then we already talked about Nedeljkovic. Now, just quickly jumping into these guys, I think that's very, very long term for Ryan Graves, who looked like an absolute stud in Colorado and looked less of a stud in New Jersey and then less of a stud, and now here he is getting quite the bag from Pittsburgh when maybe he hasn't quite earned it after leaving Colorado.
Yeah, but it might just come down to term, right? They might not have gotten him on a shorter term deal. A lot of these players want stability.
Noel Chari, who Dubas went back and got again from Toronto, signed him to a term deal with some pretty cheap money, so I think that's a good deal. I like Achari ever since even he was in Florida, being watching Tampa and Florida battle so much, seeing Achari just absolutely hit everything that moves. He's a good player. I've liked him. Good in Boston as well, and then obviously he did well for Toronto last year. Lars Eller gets his 2-year deal. I think he's a good veteran to get at that price. I think that's something that they needed as well, just to shore up a little bit more center depth, because now I'm pretty sure, what do they have? Crosby, Malkin, Granlund, and Eller as their 4 centers, I think.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I think they still got Mikhail.
So they're pretty good down the middle. And then they have Matt Nieto, who plays center or wing, and I think that's a killer deal. 2 years at $900K per year for a pretty darn good bottom 6 player in the league. I think that's a sweet deal for them to get Matt Nieto.
So do you think this is the year that Pittsburgh finally... I see his name all the time. I think for the last at least 2 years for sure I've seen him in the trade talk. But Pierre-Olivier Joseph, you think this is the year they finally get rid of him if this is their way of saying, we're here to win now still?
Possibly. I think here's the thing. If they get Erik Karlsson, Joseph's going the other direction. So I think that there's no way around him. And it might even be cap-wise too. Like, if they have to move out an extra contract to get Karlsson, I think P.O. Joseph is the one who's going to be moved.
But Ty Smith was the one on that trade.
Yeah, so in that trade. But if they have to move an extra contract outside of the trade, like to a third team, I think it'll be Joseph that they ship out to make that work. Because that makes sense to lose. They're both 6th, 7th D type guys. They're not really guys who have necessarily
lived up to the hype.
Yeah, they haven't climbed the ranks yet. Maybe P.O.'s like a number 5, and maybe he could be a 3 or 4, but he's only, 24, 25, so he hasn't even really hit his prime yet, and maybe giving him a chance to do that somewhere else. They're in win now mode, not wait for our guys to come to our level, so they have to take the jump. So it could be. I think it could happen. We have San Jose Sharks up next. Really, they've just done some good around the edge signings. They signed Blackwood in goal, taking a flyer on him. They got Kyle Burrows, Fabian Zetterlund, who they got in the trade last year for Timo Meier, and then they add Giovanni Smith on a cheap deal. Blackwood, I think, is a decent flyer. I don't think he's going to be an NHL goalie. I think just due to his injuries. I don't think it's his fault. His injuries have derailed him. I don't know about you, but San Jose is kind of a goalie wasteland. Like, you go there to die. The last goalie they had there that was decent was Martin Jones.
Well, and even him. He had, I think, one amazing season with San Jose and then dropped off the face of the earth.
I don't know why good goalies don't end up in San Jose. I don't know what that is or why they don't, but yeah, I don't think it's going to work out. It's only 2 years, and I think he could even maybe be done after that just due to injuries. I don't know how he'll end up.
Yeah, I've always liked Blackwood. I wish nothing but the best for that kid's career. 2 years, 2.35. That's a pretty gravy contract, I think. If he doesn't work out, right, it's an easy one to move or buy out.
Yeah, and he hasn't really played the last 3 years, so that's sweet for him.
Mm-hmm.
To get over a 1.5 million, and you've played, what has he played, maybe 30 games in the last 3 years. Like, that's good job on his agent. You got to give him props for pulling that one out for him.
Yeah. So if he can come out of the gate this year hot, and even stay hot in the next year, who knows? Maybe he'll get a contract that is a little bit higher than that. Hopefully. Giovanni Smith. I've always loved Giovanni Smith.
Love Giovanni.
Another guy that definitely brings grit to the team.
Yeah, that guy, I mean, you want to watch some good fighting videos, Giovanni Smith, he's a good fighter. He chucks him. He's not one of the best in the league, but in terms of he's just an animal. He just throws them, and it's fun to watch him. You watch him go, and he's got some hands on him too. He's pretty skilled. I thought for sure he was actually going to be like a top 9 guy staple in the league with Detroit, and then just I don't know what happened. He's just totally fallen off, and it's unfortunate actually. I kind of feel bad for him that he took the 2-year $800K per year deal, but hopefully he can prove himself and get a bigger contract after that. Kyle Burrows, I like Kyle Burrows from Vancouver. He had a decent year. He's solid. He doesn't really do much outside of the fact that he just plays his role. As long as they give him a good role that suits his playing style, he should be fine. If they try and stretch him out of what he's not, he'll probably be a liability there, I think.
Do you see San Jose making playoffs this year?
No.
Especially
if they trade Carlson.
Yeah.
There's definitely no chance. I mean, he was 100 points on their team, and I don't remember who the next closest guy was, but I think it was Timo Meier, who's gone. And then they could be trading Hurdle, and they could
who's been on trade talks for how many years as well. So If they get rid of that, then I think San Jose almost has to go the rebuild route, right? And you lose everything.
And then does Couture ask out? I don't know. Maybe he does. It's just you never know how far this can fall.
I think as a GM, if you're trading all those big name players, you kind of have to come talk to Couture and see where his mindset sits.
Yeah.
Do you want to win now, or do you want to stay here?
And I would imagine he wants to win. Because, unfortunately, San Jose has had these unreal captains, Marleau, Thornton, Pavelski, and now they have Couture, and they have absolutely nothing to show for like 15 years of quality NHL players on their team, quality NHL forwards. Yeah. And they have did they get to the final? I think they got to the final 1 year and 2 Western Conference finals, and then like the rest of them, I mean, they went up against the Canucks a couple times and they went back and forth. I think the closest they got was versus the Canucks. They went to the Western Conference, so they just seem to be a wasteland all around. You go there, you get paid a boatload of money, they'll throw the money at you. You look at Burns, Carlson, Vlasic, Couture, Hurdle. Like, they were throwing money around left, right, and center. You got to live in California. Like, there was no bad deal other than you're not going to win anything. Yeah. That was the only bad deal. So, other than that, I think that they'll be okay. They signed Fabian Zetterlund, who they acquired, like I said. So, he's a younger guy that they're trying to hope that he'll break out for them next year. The Seattle Kraken, they signed Brandon Dumoulin, Yamamoto, and Bellemare. Seeing Dumoulin there is weird. Picturing Dumoulin not in a Penguins jersey, that's a weird thought. I don't remember last time he wasn't in a Penguins jersey. He's been there forever, it seems like. Which is almost an ode, like a respectful ode. Like, he's been in the league forever and never makes a headline, really, but he's always been there and he's been a good player. And he still signs a 2-year, just over $3 million a year contract with the Kraken, who are wanting to be up and coming. They also had Yamamoto and Bellemare.
Who is stoked to be there, yes. Yamamoto.
Yeah, he's pumped to be in his hometown state. Because I think he's from Spokane, so he's, 3-4 hours south of Seattle. But still, they're east, not south. 3-4 hours east.
Yeah, I guess being asked where he wanted to sign, Seattle was his number one destination. He was stoked when he found out they were joining the league. So, I mean, good for him that he gets to sign in his hometown, right?
And then a little bit of love for Pierre-Edouard Bellemare from Tampa because, he's just a journeyman. He does everything you ask him to. He's one of the most energetic guys in the room from what I've heard, and he's always positive. He's keeping young guys engaged, and that's something that they need, because they need a guy like, I think, Shane Wright to kind of find a spark from a veteran like that and see what it's like to be a pro, but have fun with it. Because to me, Shane Wright didn't seem like he had fun last year. He seemed like he was grumpy and not happy with the situation and everything, really.
Well, and then you look at his junior career. Look at what Windsor gave up to get him to get a first-round exit.
Yeah,
so
right away.
That's kind of a unfortunate scenario there for him. But yeah, you definitely hope that he can find his stride. I mean, Matty Beniers, guy that's he was exciting to watch last year and winning the Calder this year.
He's unreal.
This year in total, yeah. I do think Seattle's going to be exciting to watch. I mean, they've already made the playoffs, right? That was more... They've exceeded their expectations for a team that said that they're going to build their team off draft picks and not expect to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think they'll be back next year, too. I really do. I think that the Pacific is going to be really the Oilers, the Knights, and the Kings, and then the fourth spot is kind of open, and it's probably going to be fought for by the Flames, the Kraken, and... Geez, well, that's probably it, because there's the Coyotes. So
Yeah.
that's probably it, really. There's not much else. Oh, and the Sharks. So look at that. There we go, the Sharks, the Coyotes, and the Ducks.
Yeah, so, Pacific's going to be a weird division this year, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be top-heavy and bottom-heavy. Like, their bottom teams are going to be at the bottom of the league, and the top teams are going to be fighting at the top of the league.
It's going to be a close series other than the top. I think the top two are going to have like a solid run, and for the top two, probably Edmonton, Vegas for sure.
Yeah.
I don't see many teams even coming close to the standings in them.
Probably not, yeah. I think that if you're LA, just for the sake of it, you hope Edmonton finishes first, and then Vegas is second, and you get third. So you don't have to play Edmonton first round, because then if you lose first round, at least you can say, well, it wasn't Edmonton again, at least 3 years straight.
Yeah.
Like, they have deja vu, especially after the trade for Dubois and trying to be stronger down the middle. Like, all I keep hearing about, they're basically trying to match Edmonton and Vegas down the middle. Both those teams have 3 to 4 strong centers. Well, that's what they're trying to match with LA. 3 to 4 strong centers, so that you can go any line, any night.
Well, not even just centers, man. There's 3 to 4 solid lines on those teams, right? Like, you can have fourth liners that are grinding it out with the second line and tiring them out.
I think that they'll be better off. But yeah, the Pacific is going to be a wild ride. The St. Louis Blues, they have stayed very quiet. They tried the trades. They got Kevin Hayes, but they tried obviously much more trades. Moving Torrey Krug, and it all fell apart on them. But they get McEachern and Subban, which is basically just depth signings, nothing really special there. On to Tampa. They sign Connor Sheary, Luke Glendening, Josh Archibald, Logan Brown, and Calvin DeHaan. And I'm really stoked about these signings, to be honest, because they were missing the third line identity that they kind of had when they had Gord and Goodrow and Coleman, and I think that they kind of replicated that here. When you look at Blake Coleman, you had a scoring winger. Well, there's Connor Sheary. He's a scoring winger. When you look at Barclay Goodrow, you had a rough and tumble winger who could put in some offense as well and was just smart and knew the game of hockey. Well, there's Luke Glendening. And then you had Gord, a smaller center with tons of energy who was flying around out there like a wasp. Well, that's Josh Archibald. So I don't think to compare these guys to those guys and say that it's going to be a winning formula, that's not fair. But the fact that they are similar stylistic players to those guys is good to see after what they lost this year. Losing Killorn and losing Maroon, losing Perry, losing Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. Bringing these guys in for depth, I think is awesome. I love the signings. I think that it's really going to help shore them up so that they're not going to be too stretched. Because if they didn't get those guys and they went in with just their rookies, well, I would have probably been talking about Tampa as a team that, well, maybe they won't make the playoffs this year. But these signings, just these 3 signings with DeHaan as well, would make it a lot more comfortable.
And DeHaan, I think his whole career has been an outstanding depth defenseman. Chicago, Islanders. Well, I think his longest stint was with the Islanders, wasn't it?
Yeah, in Carolina.
Yeah, but he's always been a great depth defenseman, for sure.
And you know what? A guy who changed his game to stay in the league, because when he broke into the league, he was an offensive defenseman. And he completely changed his game to be a shutdown defenseman just to stick around, because he wasn't a good skater for an offensive defenseman. He's a fantastic passer, and he had a good shot. But the offensive defensemen, the Carlsons and the Hedmans and the Yossis and the Makars, they can all get up the ice quickly. Well, he didn't have that ability, so he had to switch his whole game because he wasn't useful because he couldn't move the puck with his feet. And so he had to change to, okay, I'm not going to be on the puck as much. I'm going to be defending more. And, like, you have to commend him for that. Like, it's so hard to do that as a guy who's been offensive your whole life to go to defensive.
Well, yeah, and the league's changing so fast, right? Everyone's getting faster and faster and faster. So, yeah, you definitely want those guys to, like, yeah, if he has, like, a wicked shot, sure, shoot it from the blue line, but he's definitely got to be ready for those McDavids to be coming back down on the ice from him, right?
Yeah, so the way the game changed forced him to change, and I think he's done a fantastic job of it. He's been a pro for almost 15 years, I think, now. He's really been around a long time, so it's good to see. We can jump to the Maple Leafs now, who are kind of all over the place, but they were really the busiest with Klingberg, Bertuzzi, Domi, Reeves, and Gambrell. I know a lot of people are not liking Klingberg. I'm hearing mixed reports on it, but from the most common sense thing I've heard is that they basically got him for the power play to take pressure off Morgan Riley, to allow him to just facilitate the puck to the Stars because that's what he's good at. His job will not be in the playoffs to play against the top line. He'll be sheltered, and then he'll be put out there. They need to go on the power play. Well, you want John Klingberg on defense. If you don't have one of the top 5 defensemen in the league on the power play, he's a pretty good option to have there, and I think that was smart by them.
That's probably better than putting Mitch Marner there on defense for the power play.
That's true. 5-forward set. That didn't really ever work out for them.
But I've always liked Klingberg, and I mean, for a 1-year deal, you get to see what he can bring to Toronto. I think he's always been good in my eyes. He's got the offense. He's got offense to him. So I hope he can do good there. Max Domi, I love that signing. Obviously, his dad being a longtime Maple Leaf and probably a fan favorite back in the day. I think that's cool to have the second generation of Domi play in Toronto.
His hometown. He's pumped.
Yeah,
and this is actually a long-term contract that's not a long-term contract. So he signed a 1-year deal, but he has said that he's not playing. He's hoping to retire or leave. So it was like, I'll take this deal, wait till the cap goes up, and then I'll sign a long-term next year. So, like, totally helping the Leafs out, doing the right thing. And, you know, this is the type of player they need. When you talk about Domi, Bertuzzi, and Reeves, they are harder to play against. They lost Bunting, but I think they got a better version in both Bertuzzi and Domi because Bunting was a loose cannon, which we saw, whereas Domi is older and has kind of figured that out, and Bertuzzi has always he snapped at the right times, but he's never done anything stupid to get himself suspended. So the two of them are like upgrades on Bunting, and then you have Reeves, who they tried to do the Reeves thing with Wayne Simmons last year, and that didn't work, and Matt Martin before that, and that didn't work. But I think he's a good fit for that room. I think that he's going to bring some weight.
Well, another guy that's probably had to completely change his game around, especially in Vegas. This was a guy that was known strictly for fighting. I think he came to the realization that that's not all that's needed in the NHL anymore, right? And I think he's changed greatly in switching his game around there. And I think Bertuzzi is doing the same thing Domi is, right? I think Bertuzzi was a guy that knew he could have got probably a little bit more money than they offered, but he took the shorter term deal, right? But I think he knows that he can get more money next year, like you were saying with Domi.
Yeah, definitely. They're both definitely banking on next year getting more term. And I doubt Bertuzzi will be back. Especially if Nylander signs, there's no way Bertuzzi's coming back for $6+ million, and you're signing Nylander for the 10 he wants. Now, I did hear that why this all works, because I was like, there's no way Toronto has a cap for this. This makes no sense. Sounds like Matt Murray is going on LTIR, and his contract will be used to eat these $8 million, basically, of Bertuzzi and Domi. He's not worth $8 million, but I think he's 7-something. So it'll be just enough that they can keep these guys, keep Nylander. So that's actually a really scary team. I thought for sure Nylander had to go, but...
And if Matthews decides to do what he's apparently saying he's going to do with taking a pay cut, I don't know if you heard about that, with him saying he's potentially going to take a pay cut just so Toronto can build that Stanley Cup winning team. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, I commend the guy.
And I did hear, too, that Nylander's kind of waiting to see, because these guys are all buddies, but if one of them takes a pay cut and the others don't, it's like a slap in the face, right? They're buddies. They're supposed to be like, okay, well, let's win together. Mm-hmm. So if Nylander says, okay, I'll sign today. I will sign for 7.5, like way under market value, like shouldn't even be close to that. But then Matthews comes in at 13.5. I mean, he'd be livid. So I don't think Nylander's going to sign until Matthews signs, because Matthews signing will tell him whether he's actually in it or not, and then that will, because if he signs for 13, he knows he's gone anyway, so he might as well hold out and get 10 like he wants somewhere else, because there's no point on taking the deal cheap if your buddies aren't going to do it.
Well, if I'm a GM, I also look at it where who's worth more to me, and in my eyes, I think Austin Matthews is definitely the guy that's worth more and who I'd want to more so keep on my team if I had to pick between the two. But if Matthews takes a pay cut, then Nylander should definitely consider bumping that number down a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. All right, the Vancouver Canucks, they get Soucy, Cole, Bluger, and Irwin. So basically 2 longtime veteran defenders in Cole and Irwin. Soucy, who's kind of been relatively new to the league in the last 3-4 years, and then they get Teddy Bluger. So I think that they did some great moves. I don't think this makes them a winning team. I don't think it makes them any necessarily better, but I think that this fits their team's mold better. Some more defensive guys who can maybe play, alongside Quinn Hughes and shelter him on multiple lines. And then you get Soucy, you're hoping he can lead his own pairing, I think. And then Bluger, you're just looking at a 3rd, 4th line guy. But I think that I like Teddy Bluger. I don't know why. I've just always thought he was a good player.
Yeah, I mean personally, I don't see these signings bringing them to anywhere close to the playoffs. I think there needs to be more scoring there. And then we'll see with Thatcher Demko with that market.
Yeah.
With him potentially wanting out.
It's so unfortunate that their ownership refuses to go into a rebuild because they're invested so much money in everyone. They got all this buyout capital. They have guys who don't want to be there. They have all this stuff, and yet here they are not able to do anything because they should just go into a hard rebuild, and then hopefully in 5 years they'll be okay. But if they just can't do that because their ownership won't let them.
Well, and who's to say that if Vancouver has another bad year or another 2 bad years down the road that Hughes wants out, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he'll want to go play with his brothers down in New Jersey, which would be cool to see.
Yeah,
if you're a New Jersey fan, or even if you just respect the Hughes brothers, I think that would be awesome to see 3 brothers play on the same team.
I don't know if anyone has done it since the Sutter brothers. I think the Sutter brothers were the last ones with 3 because the Stahl brothers have not all been on the same team at the same time.
Yeah, they've only had 2 at a time.
Only 2 at a time.
And I think it's usually Mark and Jordan, or is it Mark and Eric?
No, they've all played together now.
Okay.
They've all been on the same team, just not at the same time. So hopefully we can see that from the Hughes brothers in New Jersey, where New Jersey's exciting. So that would be fun to see that happen.
Who gets number 43 though?
Maybe they just agreed that they all abandon it.
Maybe one goes 4 and the other one goes 3.
One could go 34 and one could go 43.
Yeah, I guess.
Because Luke is there first, so I guess he would take 43 because he already has. And then it would go, Quinn could get like 34 or something, or 68, I don't know. First Jack. Vegas did nothing.
And I mean, Vegas didn't really need to do anything.
Yeah, they're fine. I mean, when you're the Cup champ, you had so many guys already locked down. I think that they're just fine. They're going to be fine for years to come. Washington gets Pacioretty, which I think is good for them, but I don't think Washington's a playoff team. That's my take. I think they fall. Now apparently they're willing to move multiple top 6 forwards. Not Wilson, not Ovechkin. So the rest of them, Backstrom's, Kuznetsov's, apparently they're available for trade. It's just not those 2. When you think about that, Washington could be on a big downtrend out of the playoffs and, continuing to not be successful. It's really just the Ovechkin show anyways. They got the scoreboards keeping track of his goals and all the merchandise about him breaking the goal record. So they're fine there. I think that they're just happy to let him go out to pasture and score as many goals as he can. He's got his cup. He's happy.
Yeah, I think at this point you're just kind of happy to see him break records there now. I mean, it would be cool to see him win another cup. For sure. If I'm them, if you're willing to get rid of most of your top 6, do they consider a rebuild? That's a fairly old team too.
I would think so. And really, like for Ovechkin, I know it's kind of cool when you're like, oh, everybody's looking for a second cup, which is neat for a team aspect. But who gets to say that they're chasing Gretzky's record? It may never happen again. There may be no one else in the history of the game that can pass Gretzky. And that's solely on him. He will be the only one on that list. And that's something that I think he's super excited to get ahead of. And I think that he'll be demanding, though, that, okay, we need some competitiveness here. Like, I need people to pass me the puck, the Backstroms, the Kuznetsovs. Like, someone's got to feed me the puck here to help me get to this goal that I'm chasing. So I think that they'll still be fairly competitive, but they'll be like, third or fourth team out of the playoffs. Like, they just won't make it by a couple teams. So that's where I think they're at. Winnipeg pretty much stays the course. They keep Nemesnikov, 2-year, $2 million. I'm happy for Nemesnikov on that one. They get Brossoit back and Delia. So they basically build a goalie fight between Brossoit and Delia.
I mean, that's almost reassurance that Hellebuck is almost guaranteed out, and they drafted that highly projected goalie Thomas Milic.
Right. Yeah, they did. So, yeah, to me, I do think, like, because when you look at Brossoit and Delia, you're like, okay, well, obviously Brossoit just won the starting job in the playoffs there for a little bit for Vegas. So, like, Brossoit is obviously an NHL starting caliber goalie, maybe not for a whole season. And then Delia was with Chicago, and it was like, well, he wasn't really the best starter in his time there. So it's like,
but maybe you can. Well, Winnipeg's probably going to have to split the shift up, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe not exactly do a 50-50 split on the season, but you're definitely going to have to, win a couple games with one goalie, maybe on a back-to-back night, switch to the other goalie, or play one goalie until he loses and then try the another one. They're going to have to figure something out with their goalies.
They'll have to make it work, but I think that they'll figure it out just fine. So basically that's it for episode 3 of Gameday Tarps podcast, Free Agency Part 2. Always remember to rate and review, and thanks again for listening.